Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, A History of Folk Horror. Be not fooled by the title of this documentary, for it is not a history of folk horror as much as idiots who think they are experts that spend 3 hours and 12 minutes reinforcing the Hollywood stereotypes of folk horror. And in all that time, they barely touch on the monsters of the genre. The first hour covers British folk horror and is very thorough about the cinematic aspect of the subject. But this is also where the first big stereotypes are presented as representing everything that is folk horror. Pagans are evil, witches are evil, people who live in rural communities are evil, and they all want to kill you. I know pagan is a very generic catch-all term, but this documentary fails to inform us if anything in the entire film actually provides any information at all beyond they are the old ways. I would suggest visiting your local bookstore and finding some better source material. If they don't have an actual occult section, they will have either a New Age section or may cram it all into a generic religion section. But you should be able to turn up some decent books about specific pagan religions and their histories, as well as the various practices of folk magic that are over thousands of years old that have all been smashed down into the single word, witch. To be fair, it does cover several of the aspects of Christian persecution of these practices throughout the documentary. But having friends and family who practice different alternative religions, or who practice some form of witchcraft, or who are from rural communities, this documentary is sickeningly insulting by only covering the bigoted stereotypes of folk horror as opposed to delving into the fabulous history and mythology of the subject. But damn does it get worse from here, because then we go to America. A quick note about me. My family is white, black, Mexican, Hopi, and Native Alaskan. And this documentary proceeds to insult every member of my family, because the rest of the film isn't about folk horror, it's about racism. One of these experts accurately talks about the fact that there are no Indian burial grounds, but there are burial grounds of the various nations of Native Americans. And this is good. Because if you didn't know, which they fail to mention, is that they were called Indians by that worthless piece of shit Christopher Columbus because the idiot got lost and thought he was landed in India. But rather than cover any of the fabulous history of any of the Native American peoples, of which there is a lot of folk horror included, they fall right back into only talking about the Hollywood stereotypes. They mention the Wendigo with no details, and that's it. Just Hopi mythology alone rivals that of the more classical mythologies that are studied. You can make an entire cinematic universe with Hopi legends. Then we go to the American South, and rather than cover the abundance of folklore of the region, which has a ton of horror in it, they go with the political narrative that all white people from the American South are racist and use the old government propaganda films that say all the people of Appalachia are retarded hillbillies. Are you starting to understand how much of a fail this documentary is? Now, they do touch on the fact that Hollywood's version of voodoo and hoodoo is almost 100% wrong. But rather than give you an accurate coverage of these traditions, which do have some great horror aspects, they just show us all the bad cinematic examples. So this documentary has now ignored the nearly 600 Native American nations, shit all over the people of the American South, and insulted the religion and rich history of many Caribbean and African American peoples. The funniest part, they reference Lovecraft's work twice, but didn't include the more unsavory characteristics of his younger personality, which would have fit their political narrative perfectly. It just shows you how uninformed these experts are on the topic of folk horror. But wait, they're nowhere near done. Rather than touch on any of the numerous cultures of Mexico or of now extinct Central American peoples, it's about the conquistadors conquering Mexico. And then they spend the rest of the time talking about colonialism and all those white racist Australians. And you can't just include European folk horror. It's got to be all about the Nazis destroying Europe. They do cover Coffin Joe at least, but that's about it for the entire continent of South America. The rest just goes back to the white colonizers destroying indigenous populations. But rather than present any of the folk horror traditions of those peoples, who are they? Are they even real? Or is this just more generic historical fiction? This documentary isn't very good about documenting anything. So in conclusion, on behalf of my family, friends, and the millions of people around the world who they just spent 3 hours shitting on, fuck this movie. Subscribe for more horror, occult, and Lovecraft madness. Until next time, Cthulhu Fatagan.